Sem and Nick were typical teenage boys, always seeking adventure, always chasing the next thrill. Their parents had left for a business trip, entrusting the boys to take care of themselves for a couple of days. With no supervision and endless possibilities, the boys quickly grew bored of video games. "Hey, I've got an idea," Nick said, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. "Why don't we spend the night in the mall and make a YouTube video about it? It would be epic." Sem raised an eyebrow. "Are you serious? That's like every kid's dream and nightmare. Come on, it'll be fun. We'll sneak in, film some cool stuff, maybe even scare some of our viewers. It'll be awesome." Sem hesitated, but the allure of adventure was too strong. "All right, let's do it." They quickly packed the essentials: flashlights, their phones, portable chargers, and snacks. By the time they were ready, it was already 10 o'clock at night, and the mall was going to close in an hour. They made their way to the mall, their excitement building with each step. The boys entered the mall through the main entrance, mingling with the last few shoppers. They scoped out the layout, searching for the perfect spot to hide. After wandering around, they found a poorly guarded furniture store. It was dimly lit, with rows of beds, sofas, and dressers arranged in neat displays. The boys decided to hide under one of the beds in the back corner, far from the prying eyes of the security cameras. As they settled into their hiding spot, they heard the faint announcement echo through the mall. "The mall is now closing. Please make your way to the exits." They waited, their hearts pounding in their chests. 10 minutes later, the lights in the mall went out, plunging them into darkness. The only illumination came from the emergency lights scattered throughout the vast space. Sem felt a shiver run down his spine. "Maybe this was a bad idea," he whispered. Nick nudged him. "Shh, we'll make a couple of videos and then find a place to hide until morning. No big deal." They crawled out from under the bed and began exploring the deserted mall, their phones capturing every moment. The silence was eerie, broken only by the sound of their footsteps echoing off the marble floors. The once bustling mall now felt like a ghost town, its empty corridors stretching out like the veins of some lifeless beast. As they wandered deeper into the mall, something caught their attention, a faint, violet light seeping out from beneath a door that was slightly ajar. "What is that?" Sem asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Nick replied, curiosity piqued. "Let's check it out." They approached the door cautiously. It was the entrance to the meat department of the grocery store. The boys exchanged uneasy glances, but pushed the door open. Inside, the violet light cast an unnatural glow on the rows of meat hanging from hooks and stacked in refrigerated cases. The cold air was thick with the metallic scent of blood. "This place is creepy," Sem muttered, his breath visible in the frigid air. "Yeah," Nick agreed, his bravado fading. "But let's keep going, we've come this far." They ventured deeper into the meat department, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The further they went, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. Shadows danced on the walls, and the sound of dripping blood seemed to echo in their ears. Then Nick froze, his eyes wide with fear. "Sem, look." Sem turned his flashlight to where Nick was pointing. In a dark corner, partially obscured by a hanging slab of meat, were a pair of human eyes, staring back at them. Those are human eyes," Sem stammered, his voice trembling. The boys stepped closer, their flashlights revealing the horrifying scene before them. The eyes were not alone. Scattered around them were severed fingers, hands, and feet, all arranged as if part of some grotesque display. "Oh my God," Nick whispered, his face pale. "What is this place?" Before they could process what they were seeing, they heard a faint whisper coming from the back of the room. "Help! Help!" Sem's hand shook as he aimed his flashlight towards the source of the voice. Lying on a blood-soaked table was a woman, her body brutally mutilated. One of her legs was missing, and her torso was covered in deep, jagged cuts. She was tied down with thick ropes, her face twisted in pain and fear. Sem felt bile rise in his throat. We have to get out of here." Nick could barely speak, his eyes fixed on the horrific scene. "Yeah, we need to go. Now." They turned to leave, but before they could take a step, they heard the sound of a door creaking open behind them. The boys froze, their blood turning to ice. Someone had entered the meat department. They ducked under the table, hiding in the shadows. Their hearts pounded in their chests as they listened to the slow, deliberate footsteps approaching. Through the gaps in the table, they saw a large, full-bodied man. His clothes were stained with blood, and his heavy breathing filled the room. He lumbered past the table, heading towards the back corner where the eyes and severed limbs lay. The boys held their breath, praying he wouldn't notice them. The man reached the back of the room and began rummaging through the meat, picking up pieces and examining them. Then, to the boys' horror, he started to eat. Sem felt like he was going to pass out. "We have to leave before he sees us," he whispered, barely audible. Nick nodded, his face as white as a sheet. They began to crawl out from under the table, moving as quietly as possible. But as they inched towards the door, the man suddenly stopped eating. He sniffed the air, his head turning slowly in their direction. He sniffed again, louder this time, his nostrils flaring. Then, with a sharp snap of his head, he turned to face them. His eyes were small, almost non-existent, and his pupils were so narrow they appeared completely white. His mouth stretched into a wide, sinister smile, revealing a mouthful of gnarled, blood-stained teeth. The boys stared at him, paralyzed with fear. The man's smile widened, his face a mask of twisted joy. Sem felt his body go numb. "Run," he whispered urgently. They bolted for the door, their footsteps echoing through the meat department. Behind them they heard the man give chase, his heavy footsteps pounding against the floor, but he was slow, his large frame hindering his speed. The boys burst out of the meat department and into the mall's darkened corridors. They could still hear the man's footsteps behind them, growing fainter as they ran. They didn't stop until they saw a beam of light cutting through the darkness. A security guard was patrolling the mall, his flashlight sweeping across the floor. Relief washed over the boys as they approached him. "Please help us," Sem cried out, his voice shaking. The guard turned to them, his expression stern. "What are you doing here? The mall is closed." "We got lost," Nick said, trying to catch his breath. "Can you let us out? There's someone after us." The guard narrowed his eyes. "You're not supposed to be here. Come with me." He led them to his office, a small room filled with monitors and security equipment. The boys sat down at his desk, their hearts still racing. "Wait here," the guard said, his tone cold. "I'll be right back." The door closed behind him, leaving the boys alone in the dimly lit office. They exchanged nervous glances, the weight of what they had seen still heavy on their minds. "What do we do?" Sem asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Nick didn't have an answer. Before they could think of a plan, the door opened again, and the guard stepped back in. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood the man from the meat department, his blood-stained clothes and twisted smile unmistakable.
"How far you run?"
the man said, his voice a low growl. The boys tried to stand to run, but it was too late. The man lunged at them, his massive hands gripping their arms with a strength that made escape impossible. The guard watched with an indifferent expression as the man dragged the boys out of the office and back into the darkness of the mall. Days later, when the mall reopened, the boys' parents returned home to find that Sem and Nick had never come back. They reported them missing, but no trace of the boys was ever found. The mall continued its business as usual, its bright lights and bustling crowds unaware of the horrors that lurked within its walls after closing time. But in the dead of night, when the last shopper had left and the lights went out, the whispers of two terrified boys echoed through the empty corridors, a reminder of the night they had entered the mall and never left.